right, welcome to Groundwater Talk Live. We are talking today about taxing groundwater in California, specifically agricultural groundwater. So, what will that do to meet the goals of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? And is it legal? Is it taking private properties? I would like to hear from you after the show. Leave any posts in the comments, and I think it's a discussion worth having because when you start talking about taxing groundwater, you start to interfere with groundwater rights, and does the greater good of the basin and a common shared resource exceed, or is that greater than your individual rights, groundwater rights, and then what are water rights worth then? So let's look at an article that came up recently on the well, that's the wrong article. Hold on a minute. Let me get this right here. This is an article that came up on the Hill, so titled "Charging California Farmers for Groundwater Use Could Yield Massive Conservation Gains, Researchers Find." And I'll show you the research paper in just a little bit, but let's examine this because it's got an interesting spin to it. Yeah, as we look at the article, you can really see the spin involved here, and it's really kind of let's just say it's anti-groundwater water rights type of spin here, that the water is a public resource and you really shouldn't own it, and so you should be able to charge people for it. So that's really what they're finding here. So let's dive in here a little bit. So what they're saying here is they start off is California farmers are willing to cut back on groundwater usage when their local governments start charging for this formerly free resource, new research has found. Note the word formerly free resource is it's not free. You got to pump it. You got to drill a well. You got to pump it. And basically, water rights are that with groundwater, you own the water beneath your property. So now we understand that water in aquifers is interconnected. So there is some interference that does go on, but the way water rights are defined is you have the rights to the water beneath your property. So we're seeing more and more restrictions put on this. I don't think any of that has been challenged legally to any great extent, especially with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in California. But to what extent can you go? So you'll see the spin here is, formerly free resource. Those are really loaded words here. And like I say, it is not free to pump groundwater. And so, and you have the right to that. So the way the law exists right now, you have proper property rights, you have water rights. So historically, Golden State farmers have kept their crops irrigated amid extreme heat and drought by tapping into groundwater beneath their properties at no charge other than the cost of pumping. So they do recognize that, but once again, they're putting a spin here that man, you're doing this at no charge. It should cost you something to take this water out. No, you own the water. So that practice has fueled concerns about the depletion of the state's available water resources as climate change drives worse and more frequent drought. We get into the climate change thing again here. We can argue that another day. Most people that watch the show know how I feel about that. But and this is true, is we are seeing a depletion of the water resources. So really we need to balance things a little bit. and just stealing people's water rights and giving them to the state. Really, what that seems to be the spin here, even though they don't come out and say that, but that seems to be the spin here, and that is not the solution. There are other solutions, and I think the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA for short, really is working towards some of those things. You got to make it equitable, and everybody has to recognize that if you're in a groundwater basin, an alluvial groundwater basin, that those resources are shared, and overdraft is not a good thing it's going to hurt us all in the long run. But there's got to be some balance other than just taking people's water rights. And that seems to be where this is leading. So some local agencies seeking to address these concerns have begun to change their operating strategies in recent years following the passage of a significant revamp to statewide groundwater regulations, according to the authors of a new working paper published by the University of Chicago's Energy Policy Institute. And we'll look at that in just a minute here. I have that up on a different screen. The wide-scale implementation of such shifts could lead to a reduction in acreage of the state's thirstiest fruits and nuts by nearly a quarter, while encouraging massive transitions to less consumptive alternatives, per the paper. So really what we're talking about here, and this article will go along to discuss that, is more fallow land, fewer crops. So taking land out of circulation because you can't afford to water it because the state is going to charge you a tax. And where the state has the right to charge you a tax for what you own, I guess there's some precedent for that, but it seems awful drastic here. Water does have value, and we learned that lesson when there's less of it to go around. But it shouldn't get to the point where some are starved for water. Generally, this is a true statement. So, co-author Fiona Berlig, an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, Harris School of Public Policy, said in a statement, "Probably never been on a farm in her life." So, I just point that out. So. To meet the lofty goals of California's 2014 Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, the authors estimated that users statewide will need to reduce groundwater pumping by about 19.2% by 2042. So almost 20% is what we're talking about here. Local agencies have therefore begun instituting a variety of discretionary policy mechanisms, and this is where the rubber meets the road here, including taxes, fees, pumping limits, and conservation incentives. More than half of these agencies, the researchers found, are opting to put some type of price on groundwater. Now, I've long said we're probably going to see, in California anyway, meters on every well. Maybe not domestic wells, but certainly ag wells, commercial wells, industrial wells are probably going to see some type of metering system. And you're going to have and we see in some places where you have adjudicated basins, there's water allocations, and so you only get so much. And I think you're going to probably see meters everywhere, even in non-adjudicated basins, because SGMA is really going to get at an allocation for the entire basin, and that's going to be divvied up. How that is divvied up, whether it's equitable or not, is kind of a subject still for negotiation that they're still hashing out. But some type of metering is going to have to take place in order to prove that. So whether that actually works its way down to domestic wells or not, possibly not, but it may come to that if they need to squeeze every last drop out. But certainly certainly commercial, agricultural, and industrial type wells are going to see some type of allocation and probably a metering system at some point. So we're going to get to that point, and that's really what this is leading to. Obviously, if you're going to tax groundwater, you're going to have a meter and determine what the use is in order so you can properly tax things. So that's really what this is leading to. So this article goes on, and I'm reading this because there's a lot of stuff here to unpack. To quantify changes in both water extraction and pumping costs, the authors combine data on groundwater levels, pump efficiency, and electricity consumption linked to pumping across California's Central Valley, the state's agricultural core. So they really modeled up electricity consumption because that's your ongoing variable cost, putting in the well and those types of things. That's going to be, those are going to be more capital costs that are then amortized over time. Your main variable cost is going to be electricity consumption. So that's kind of really what they focused on here. So from there, they were able to model how farmers respond to changing groundwater costs over different time frames by evaluating their crop choices and water use. Ultimately, the researchers found that every 10% surge in groundwater pumping prices comes with a 1.4% reduction in land containing fruit and nut perennials and a 0.72% increase in land left fallow, and overall groundwater pumping reductions of about 3.6%. So this is really what they're getting at, is taking crops out of circulation and fallowing land, so less crops. Now, I often state that I think that California is really a desert and is very fertile ground, and especially in the Central Valley. But they're growing a lot of things that shouldn't grow in such a dry climate, including the almond trees and stuff that are very profitable but very water intensive, I guess we'd say. So it may, you may want to see a shift in the types of crops grown, and I think that's a legitimate thing. But this is basically trying to force that and fallow land. So fallow land is not feeding anybody. I will point that out right there, and that is not a good thing. So we need to figure out how to grow our crops, and not be fallowing land that could be otherwise be producing food for the nation. California produces a lot of food for the nation in the Central Valley, and fallowed land doesn't grow any crops. So that's not good. So while farmers don't change crops in response to short-lived price changes, due mostly to the nature of farming, obviously, they're recognizing, like I say, these people don't live on farms, They don't know that you got to plan well in advance and buy your seeds and plant them, and it takes a while for things to grow. So it's kind of like this is a revelation to them, obviously, but that is the nature of farming. They do start changing what they grow and whether they grow at all when they are charged permanent fees. Well, it adds into your cost and your profitability. Farmers live on a pretty tenuous margin sometimes. So you get a little bit of drought, it kills off your crops, you don't plant things, you're not making any profits. Your costs go up at all, seed costs go up, your production costs go up. You're going to really look at whether it's even profitable to plant those crops in the long term. Short term, you're kind of committed because you got to plan in advance, at least a year in advance. So this makes permanent sense. The costs go up. If you're no longer profitable, then you're not going to grow. That's just basic economics. So this is another university professor from University of Maryland. Once again, probably never been on a farm in his life. So But that's basically what we're looking at. So, meeting statewide targets of reducing pumping by 19.2% would require a groundwater pumping tax of about 60%, or about $30 per acre foot of water used, according to the paper. What do you think that is going to do to the profitability of growing crops when you're starting to look at $30 per acre feet, or a pumping tax of 60%? That's a pretty big number there. We don't tax 60% on anything. So huge number. And of course, that's going to affect long-term agricultural production, and lands are going to go fallow. You're not going to be producing food, is what it comes down to. So the implementation of such a tax, the authors found, would lead to an almost 9% switch in cropland to less consumptive alternatives, as well as a 24% plunge in fruits and nuts and a 50% rise in land left fallow. Fallow land is not producing any crops. So where are you going to get those crops? I guess we're just going to fly them in from Argentina or wherever. They don't have to worry about this stuff. So that's, why grow it here? Let's preserve our own groundwater, and why grow it here when we can import it from South America, right? So that basically seems to be what they're saying here. 50% rise in land left fallow. That is a huge number, really, when you think about it. So, evaluating these findings, Burley suggested the importance of putting a price on groundwater and treating water as a commodity that should be conserved. Well, yes, we need to conserve things. This may be the wrong way to do it. Through such a shift in perspective, farmers are much more likely to adopt cultivation strategies that are more suitable to land conditions and natural resources that we all have to share, rather than using up natural resources for free to make the greatest profit. It's not free. Let's emphasize that again. This is, to be quite frank, this whole article has a very socialist perspective on it. That's my opinion here. So that 50% rise in fallow land, that is not a good thing for our food production in this country. As I said, California produces a lot of food for the country, and a 50% rise in fallow land. Yes, I agree that we could take the water-intensive crops out of the equation and focus on less water-intensive crops. But that's something that will happen over time, and I think that forcing it by taxing the water is probably not the best way to go. Plus, we are looking at, once again, how does this relate to water rights and private property use? Are we usurping private property rights? I'd really like to hear from folks on this issue, because it's something that we really want to look at is are we usurping private property rights? Are we usurping water rights with these types of proposals? So let me just shift to one other article here. This is just an example of how SGMA comes to play, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is from early 2023, where the state water regulators, State Water Resources Control Board, placed an agricultural hub in Central Valley under probation due to excessive groundwater pumping that's dried up the region. So in this area, Tulare Basin has been a problematic area. Groundwater levels are dropping, so they've had to restrict usage of groundwater in that area. This is going to preferentially hurt farmers. So that's something that once again, however, they're not talking about taxes here. They're talking about restricting usage for everybody. there seems to be a lot of precedent for this type of thing, not so much for the taxes. And as we get back to the taxes thing, also note that we're only talking here about farmers, taxing farmers' water use. We're not talking about any metropolitan water use or anything like that. We're just focusing on farmers. So is this equitable? Is this something that can even be legally done just to tax farmers and not tax other users of groundwater in that basin? So a lot of potential problems here. And so once again, I'd like to say, I would like to hear your comments on this. Let's look at that study paper just real quick here before we wrap things up. And this is the paper they're mainly talking about, the Energy Institute at Haas. Once again, and this is on the, I'll post a link for this. This is at the University of California, Berkeley. They focused on electricity use as the major proxy for the variable costs in pumping groundwater. So, and how restricting that would change groundwater pumping in the long run. So this is the actual paper. I'll post the link to this in the show notes. But there are, but here's the abstract. Let me just read this to you. And this kind of echoes on the article, but how do agents respond to policy when investments have high upfront costs and lasting payoffs? We estimate farmers' short and long run responses to changes in groundwater pumping costs in California, where perennial crops with these features are prevalent and where groundwater pumps consume 6% of the state's electricity. We use both fixed effects and dynamic discrete choice models that leverage quasi-experimental variation in agricultural electricity tariffs. In the short run, farmers' groundwater electricity demand elasticity is minus 0.76%, and they do not change crops. In contrast, the long-run groundwater electricity elasticity is minus 0.36%, driven in part by meaningful reductions in water-intensive perennial cropping. Meeting California's sustainability targets would require reallocation of 9% of acres, including a 50% increase in fallowing. This would also reduce energy consumption for this end use by nearly 20%. So they are using electricity as the proxy for groundwater pumping costs. Seems reasonable because that's the main variable cost. There was one other section in here I wanted to point out. This goes on for a number of pages, but yes, right here, we asked two main research questions. First, what is the elasticity of demand for agricultural groundwater over the short and long run? Second, to what extent do farmers switch crops in response to higher groundwater costs? Despite the importance of these questions, answers have proven elusive because, one, groundwater extraction is rarely priced or measured, mainly because of water rights. And there's a dearth of plausibly exogenous variation in groundwater costs. And three, modeling how forward-looking farmers respond to cost shocks is a complex dynamic problem. And I think that last one is mainly due to the fact that farmers have a longer range output just because of the crop cycles. We have to plan in advance, buy the seeds, get the fertilizer and all these types of things, and then get it in the ground. There's a full growing season ahead of us, harvesting. So yes, there are some dynamics there because you got basically a long cycle. It's not like you're going to immediately change things up. So they explain their methodology here and go through here. So you can see there's a lot of a lot of stuff in here. It's just actually worth reading to see how they did this. Some of it gets a little esoteric, but there's quite a bit here. So they go through some of the background, groundwater depletion and management policy. So this gets down to the meat of SGMA. Groundwater depletion and changes in groundwater depth. This is an interesting chart here. You can see in the Central Valley, there's places you have over 10 feet of static groundwater level changes due to overpumping, and then they're comparing that to fruit and nut perennials that presumably are the ones that consume most of the water. So. And then they look at PG&E's data. PG&E mainly serves the Central Valley, Pacific Gas and Electric. They're the main electricity supplier. So they're looking at their wire-to-water efficiencies, land use data. So they go through really a lot of information here. So as far as studies go, it's a sound study. The question I get back to, and you can see this just really goes on and on. And so I'm not, let's get down to the very end here. Yeah, they got some solutions here, and some of these are worth looking at. So here's your groundwater sustainability plan, sustainability targets under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So they're looking at some places, especially coinciding with where water levels will drop the most, of greater than 30%. So how do you get to that point without the taxes? So is this a private property on a water rights issue or not? So that's really what it comes down to. They're looking at some pretty drastic measures. And I guess I'm most disturbed by the fact that, going back to the article here, is that they're looking at taxing farmers but not municipalities. And I think the reason why is because municipalities, a lot of people live there, you would get, and their water bills go up all of a sudden, you would really be getting a quite a jump in your water bill. So due to the number of people that would be protesting, I think it's easier to pick on the farmers and start there. And farmers do use a fair amount of water, and like I said, 6% of the state's electricity goes to farmers. So that's basically where they're going with things. And so is this fair and equitable? That part we need to determine. So, but this may be what's coming down the pike. It's important to note this, and as California goes, so goes some other parts of the country as well. Will we see this in the Midwest, where we're having similar challenges in the Ogallala Aquifer and some of those other aquifers out there in Texas, where you have different major aquifers in Texas where you're having some of these issues? So is this going to catch on, and will you start charging farmers for their own water? So that's really what it comes down to. This is your water, but we're going to charge you to use it. So that's kind of where we're at. So, all right. So that is the show today. A little shorter than normal, but I wanted to get this out there and just really ask the question: is this a solution to some of our groundwater woes and creating sustainability in our groundwater basins? And this is California's proposals. Nothing has been implemented yet, but I'm seeing a shift towards going to metering of all the municipal, agricultural, and commercial type wells. And we may be looking at a tax or some type of surcharge going on those things is kind of looking at it the way this may be going. As these studies start to trickle out, we start to see some of the stuff being pushed into policy. So this may end up being a reality. Thanks for watching the show. We do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. So we appreciate you being here.